I'm good at noticing things. I've always been good at noticing. Mrs. Lancaster back at Mountford told me. She said that was one of my strengths, that I always picked up on tiny details that no one else saw. She said, Albie, if you had any skill at language, you might have made a very fine writer. That's what she said. Here are some things I notice. I notice that even though my best friend Erlin is the same exact age as me, which is 10, I'm 2 whole inches taller. My arms reach way farther when I stretch, too. That's the thing anybody could notice, though. That one's easy. I notice that I can fill a water balloon at the drinking fountain in the park almost twice as fast as Erlin. He always gets the knot twisted around his finger and spills water all down his shirt and has to start over, and I can always tie mine with no problem. That's an easy one to notice, too. But I bet that no one else but me ever notices that when Erlin's mom says to count out 10 peanut butter crackers for a snack, Erlin always gets his on his plate just a little bit faster than me. Just a little bit. And I bet that no one ever noticed either that when me and Holly Martin would do library helpers every other Monday, she always finished her stack of books to put back on the shelf a couple minutes before me. Just a couple minutes. It was the same amount of books, but it was always a couple minutes, every time. I think I figured out why Holly was faster, because I watched her when she was putting the books away, and her mouth didn't move at all the way mine does when I'm saying the alphabet in my head. I think maybe Holly didn't have to say the alphabet in her head. I think maybe she just knew the order somehow, without even saying it. I bet no one noticed either that when Mr. Honorato came in for science last year and asked who thought the tall skinny glass could hold more water than the short fat one, I was the only kid who raised my hand wrong. I bet no one noticed because I raised it really quick, and then I noticed nobody else had their hand up, so I put mine down, and I sat in the back anyway. It was a trick question besides, because both glasses held the same exact amount of water. Somehow everyone else knew that already. I bet no one even noticed I stopped raising my hand in class. I don't think anyone but me notices any of those things. I'm really good at noticing. I hope I'll always be a better noticer than everybody else. Lunch. Erlin's sister Anir told me that the hardest part of going to a new school would be lunch. If you don't have anybody to sit with, she told me, then everyone will think you're a loser. If you sit with other loser kids, then everyone will think you're a loser too. If you sit with kids who are way cooler than you and they don't want to sit with you, then they'll think you're a loser. You have to find kids to sit with who are just a little bit cooler than you, but not too much. Then everyone will think you're cool too, but not trying too hard. When she said all that, When she said all that, it made me really scared, because it sounded super hard to figure all that out, and what if I messed up? Lucky for me, at my new school, everybody had to eat lunch with their same class, so I didn't worry too much once I figured that out. Everybody in Mrs. Rouse's class sat at one long table in the middle of the cafeteria. Mostly it was boys on one side and girls on the other, but it was mixed up a little bit. I was sitting next to a girl who was tons shorter than me, even sitting down. Her feet didn't quite reach the floor. I looked at her lunch as she pulled it out of her brown paper lunch bag. Turkey sandwich with no crust, cut at an angle, a box of apple cranberry juice, carrot sticks. It looked like a healthy lunch, but loads better than mine. I had leftover kimchi and a cold bagel with cream cheese, which is what Mom gives me when she forgets to make my lunch the day before. I have that lunch a lot. I looked around the table. Nobody else had kimchi. Almost everybody had sandwiches. I zipped the kimchi back inside my puffy green lunch sack. While I chewed my bagel, I looked around the table and tried to figure out who Erlin's sister Anir would think was cool and who she would say was a loser. But I couldn't really tell. Everybody sort of just looked like a fifth grader. There was a boy with spiky hair and a kid with a skateboarding shirt. One of the girls had a panda lunchbox, which in my old school would be lame, but she seemed like she had a lot of friends, so maybe here panda lunchboxes were okay. I wondered who made up the rules about what was lame and what wasn't, and who was cool and who was a loser. If somebody told me what the rules were, I'd be fine. While I was thinking all that, the girl next to me, the short one with the healthy but good lunch, pulled another thing out of her lunchbox. "Gummy bears?" I said. "Cool. I love gummy bears." The girl looked up at me and smiled. It was kind of a funny smile, actually, like she was surprised I was talking to her. But before she could say anything, the boy across from me, who was wearing the skateboard shirt, I think Mrs. Rouse called him Darren, said, "Ooh, Albie, don't talk to Betsy." I don't know why he said her name like that, Betsy. But when I looked at the girl, it seemed like she definitely didn't like it. Her shoulders were sunk down, and her face was red, and somehow she looked even smaller than before. "Don't call her that," I said to the skateboard shirt boy, Darren. "That's mean." I didn't know why it was mean, but sometimes you could tell that a person wasn't being nice, even if you weren't sure how. "Ooh, Albie," Darren said, "is Betsy your girlfriend?" And then he laughed like that was so funny, and so did all the boys next to him, and practically the whole other side of the lunch table. Then Darren tossed a potato chip toward me, and it stuck to my shirt. And even though it didn't hurt, because it was just a potato chip, I knew that definitely wasn't nice. The whole other side of the lunch table laughed again. I think maybe a couple of other kids might have almost started to toss potato chips at me too, because I could tell they thought it looked like fun. But just then, one of the lunch duty aides came over and got mad at Darren for throwing food. Darren glared at me the whole time like it was my fault he threw a potato chip at me and got in trouble, and the whole other side of the lunch table glared too. That's when I figured out that the PS 183, Darren was the one who wrote the rules. So it turned out that Erlen's sister Aner was right. Lunch was the hardest part of the day, but it wasn't all bad. After Darren and his friends finished glaring at me and went to the playground, I looked back at the table, and there, on a napkin next to my puffy green lunch sack, was a gummy bear. A red one. And everyone knows that red gummy bears are the best ones. I looked over at the girl next to me. "Thanks," I told her, and I popped the gummy bear in my mouth. She smiled. Somehow, she didn't look so small when she smiled. Stutter. I figured out why Darren and those other mean kids called the girl with the gummy bears Betsy. It was because she has trouble saying words sometimes, especially beginnings like B's and T's and K's. I noticed it in class when Mrs. Rouse asked her to read a passage out loud from the textbook. The boys started snickering, and her face turned bright red, and her voice got really quiet. So quiet you could hardly hear her, until finally Mrs. Rouse said, "Thank you, Betsy, that was wonderful." Betsy doesn't talk too much. I asked Callista about it, and Callista said it sounded like Betsy had a stutter, which can make talking hard. I decided I liked Betsy. She gave me gummy bears at lunch without me even asking. We even picked each other for library partners. And when I got confused when Mrs. Rouse was explaining about the online card catalog, Betsy didn't make fun of me. She just pointed to the right place where I was supposed to click. I didn't mind that Betsy didn't talk too much, because it can be hard sometimes, saying what you mean, and I thought maybe I understood her most of the time anyway.